What's up, everybody? Andrew Dewar here from Do or Die Productions, talking about a compression deeper dive. We're not going super deep. We just had our friend Laney commented on the 60-second sound compression video. I think it was 60-second sound number 1. Commented on compression. It was like, I still don't get it. That's all right. We're going to get it together a little bit more. We're going to go a little slower and go a little bit deeper on it. So here's what we're going to talk about. Knee ratio threshold, maybe real quick attack, but knee ratio threshold, one more time. Threshold, the point at which compression starts to occur. Now it's going to have a negative number usually, so we'll say this is negative 18 decibels, right? And that's because 0 in your DAW or your software you're concerned with or your live sound console, 0 is the max. It's already run out. So we're looking at numbers below 0. In this case, 18 decibels below 0 is the threshold when we're going to start compressing. Knee, well, let's talk about ratio. Ratio, how aggressively are we going to compress? For example, let's say the signal hits, we'll say negative 10. So negative 10 dB, which is 8 dB higher, correct? 8 dB louder, right? We're under 0 or negative numbers. 8 dB louder than our threshold. If we compress at 4 to 1, every 1 that we've gone over, it will cut, sorry, every 4 units we go over, we'll get 1 dB out. For example, 10 dB of negative 10 is our threshold is negative 18. Negative 10 is the point at which compression. 4 to 1 in a utopian world, we would get 2.5 dB out, right? Our 8 dB has turned into 2.5 over, so we can do the math here. Instead of 18, we're at negative 15.5 dB. Not that important. All we need to know is that ratio is controlling how aggressively we're actually using this compression. Again, this is maybe 4 to 1 or something here. Infinity to 1 would look like this. 1 to 1 would continue to just look like the line itself and is not compression. Nothing would happen. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at something else I wanted to talk about in 60-second sound, but I don't have enough time. We're going to look at it in the way your DAW. This shape right here is just what we usually see as the interface to show us compression. This is what you see though in your software when you're looking at Pro Tools, Ableton, Logic, Reaper, whatever you decide to use. This is what you usually see. So let's talk about it in this form. We're going to say this point here is negative 3 dB on our meters. This is like negative, we'll say this is negative 18, making stuff up. But here's what's important. Let's say we put our threshold, we compressor on here, we put our threshold at negative 20, we'll say, right? So it's just below the peak here, and this would run across this anytime. So anytime we go above this threshold, we are going to see compression. In this case, we're going to say we have a 0 attack time, which is impossible, but 1 microsecond. Happy 1 little microsecond, or millisecond in this case. Attack time, what does that mean? As soon as this volume on this waveform goes above our dashed line, our threshold of negative, write this down, negative 15 dB, right? It's going to chop it off, all right, like that. What's it going to do here? Chop it off. This would happen on the inverse side as well, underneath. I'm not going to get that deep, but same idea, right? We've chopped off the waveform right where it's at. Now, what happens, this is if we're at infinity to 1. This is our extreme compression, which we call limiting. Infinity to 1, right? That's the ratio we're using here. Give me 3 seconds, redraw the tops of these. Something like this. Right? So, what if though we were doing something like negative, we'll say, oh, sorry, I did that bad. Not negative 15. This was like negative 20 is really where this threshold is. Sorry, I'm going backwards. But here's what we should look at, right? What if we said our threshold was like negative 10? All of a sudden, our threshold is up here. This first waveform would never even see any compression because it never passes negative 10 dB. This one, again, infinity to 1 millisecond, would chop off this much of the sound, and the same thing on the bottom. So that's kind of what we're looking at with compression. What we use it for oftentimes is a dynamic control, as you're seeing right now, but we can also use it for color and shaping. So here's something cool you can try with compression. We want to get super punchy. This is a drum waveform, we'll say. We want to get something super punchy. So we set it to like -40 dB, way down here. Oh, I'm ruining my color of my marker. -40 dB. We've taken our 1 millisecond, we've turned it into something more like 15 milliseconds, right? And our ratio, we'll say, still infinity to 1. Watch what happens. Is this waveform passes the mark of -40 dB when the drum is hit. We'll say this is a drum, I think. That's what I said. And what's going to happen is 15 milliseconds are going to go by. We'll say this is 15 milliseconds in time. 15 milliseconds go by, and then we chop it down to the threshold. All of a sudden, we've created a new shape of a waveform, and now we have something that's way more articulate and way more punchy, way more attack on the front end. Same thing here, I'll draw it again. Let's say this is 15 milliseconds. Again, this is just making this up. 15 milliseconds. As soon as we finish up there, all the way down to the threshold, in this case, -40. This is one way we use a compressor, and this is a way we can use it to create harder transients, and we can make things more attack heavy, and then it gets out of the way of the mix. And the other way we could use this is the opposite, and what we just kind of looked at is we can use a fast attack time and help round things out. For example, let's say this is an acoustic guitar. It's super aggressive, super punchy. What we want to do is take away that front end attack from the acoustic guitar. So what we'll do is we set our attack time maybe to 5 milliseconds. Just a little bit of attack still there, but otherwise we're going to chop it. We're not going to go -40, that's a little drastic, but let's say at -18, let's say we like the -18, so we put our threshold right there. Essentially, what happens, first waveform kind of gets through, maybe just chops a little bit. Second waveform, very heavy compression, but what is going to do is we're going to start to create less attack on the front side of the note, and we're going to start to blend in the rest of this note here, the sustain, the decay, the release. All of this is going to be a little bit more blended. If you don't know those words, I'm going to get to one on 60 Second Sound, but not yet. Long story short, compression is our dynamic control. People use it for color and such, but we're talking about the way we can manipulate sound and level with compression. Hope that helps. If you have more questions, just hit me up on Facebook. I hit up Do or Die actually, and we'll get a message thread going and we'll talk deeper. But really, I encourage you to play with these settings in a software and see what they actually do. Cheers, guys.